As we talked about before, there's two different ways that you can do side purflings on a guitar. As we saw earlier, I can attach them already so that the purflings are already on the binding when I bend them, or I can glue on the purflings afterwards. This is the bent binding for that horn in the lower bout, and this is going to be the purfling for it. It's not actually already attached. We're going to glue that separately while we do the binding job. I find generally that this first method is easier because it's one less thing to worry about gluing up in the mayhem that is binding a guitar. However, if you do attach the purfling to the binding before bending and before gluing, you need to come around with a razor blade and scrape that inside edge that will meet the guitar. If there's any burrs in this purfling, then it's going to make your binding stick strange. So we're just going to give that a light scraping, make sure everything's good, and then get to binding. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology of binding, mainly because I'm not actually going to film myself doing the binding job. The reason for this is has to be an extremely fast process in order to get everything tight and squared up before you glue. But I am going to show you the techniques for doing this binding, as well as when I've done all the binding, I'll turn the camera back on and I'll show you how it looks while it's drying. It's actually pretty interesting. What you're going to do is you're going to start by putting glue all around the binding ledge, and also if you're doing top purflings, you're going to put glue on one edge of the top purfling so that it'll stick to the body, and also have glue on this side. That way every surface that's touching another surface has glue on it when everything is put together. Then, using something called butcher's tape, it's this brown, almost papery, wax papery feeling tape that's extremely tacky. It's extremely strong tape as well, and that's why we use it for binding. What you're going to do is you're going to start with any ends that meet. In our case, the end down at the back of the guitar. We're going to start gluing there, and we're going to attach strips of butcher's. Obviously, we're going to put purfling in as well, with all these ends mitered correctly. And we're going to line everything up. And now you see why I don't plan on filming it and talking while I do it. Either way, so we'll line everything up perfectly, and we'll place a piece of butcher's tape. What we're going to do is we're going to push it down on here, and then leverage it up and over, and as we come over, pull and tape so that it puts pressure going inwards. The next one we're going to start on the top and put pressure going downwards and tape. And we'll just alternate these as we go along so that the pressure is going in and down, in and down, in and down. And this is what's going to keep our binding flush to both the top and the side. And here's what it looks like with the first side glued up. I like doing one side at a time. It lets me get to everything faster. As you can see, I started with the butcher's tape, strapping it down, and then strapping it up, strapping it down, and strapping it up. And once I had the tape all the way around, holding everything in place and keeping everything in, then I went back and I went all around this to hit all these areas and pull it in tight with this product, Heavy Duty Jute. Seems to work pretty well. One thing I do want to warn with this is prepare to get glue everywhere. I mean, you're just going to get all over your hands, for one, because you're messing with the bindings that have glue all over them. And then also, when you're putting the jute on, you're using your body as leverage and pulling the jute to get it taut over these edges. You want the jute to have some force to it. So you're actually pushing the body up this body up against your body and leveraging to pull the ute in, or jute, whatever. And so you're going to get glue all over yourself, so be aware of that with whatever you wear. And I'll come back and show you the other half done when this is done drying. Now after you've got your binding glued up, it's going to sit probably a little proud on the edges as well as on the tops, unless you had things absolutely perfect. But I'd rather do a little scraping than risk my binding being too thin or not tall enough. So what I do is, for flat tops and backs, this is a little easier because you can use a normal scraper. You don't have to worry about scratching your top or anything like that. But for a carved top, I use a scraper just like this. It's called a French curve scraper. And as you can see, it's got these, I don't know what to call them, but just these curves that allow you to get here get your binding without marring your top surface. And depending on where the curve is and how tight things are, I'll go to a tighter radius to scrape and whatnot. I like to do the top of the purfling first, because with a carved top, what a lot of people tend to do is they'll actually tend to angle the scraper down a bit, and you'll end up with not a perfectly flat, and that's fine because we're going to round over our binding ever so slightly. But just to add to my safety precautions, I'll usually flush the sides of the binding afterwards, so that if I really dig into a corner, it doesn't matter because I'm losing a little bit of that corner when I flush up the sides. And it's really just a simple process. It takes a little time, but just something you gotta do. Literally just going to scrape. And you can see these shavings coming off. And slowly, bit by bit, just work your binding down until it reaches the top. And one thing that's really important is to have a very flat surface on the edge of your scraper. One way to do that is I like to cover the edge in Sharpie, and then I'll either take it to my disc sander or with a hand file at perfectly 90 degrees and go along until all the Sharpie's gone, so I know I have a flat surface. And then you take a burnisher and just burnish an edge so that it's got a little, you can feel it, it's abrasive. And that will help make this go faster. And here's how it should look when you're done. All the binding and purfling is flush with the top. And it's, with a French curve scraper, since it's got those curves, if you're expecting everything to be perfectly flat, blah, 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 if you run your finger along it, you feel no dimples, no nothing, you're kidding yourself. I mean, I'm sure an amazing craftsman could achieve that, but the point of this activity is exactly what I said, flushing the binding to the top. Later, as you can see, we've got some glue on the top, everything like that. I mean, before we finish this guitar, we're gonna have to sand it with a random orbital sander. And when you come across this with 220, 320 on your random orbital, and you hit these edges, it's going to perfect everything. So really, when you're scraping, you're looking to flush everything up. That's it. Now, to true up our binding on the sides, there's two ways you can do this. And the way that I'm going to show you is ever so slightly controversial. Some people don't like to do it because they don't want to risk blowing out their binding after all that work they've put into it. But you can do it with a router. Have the bearing follow your body side, and the cutter will cut obviously to match the body, and that's perfect unless you've got a really figured wood. That's the only time I won't use this method. Like if I have flamed koa or flamed maple binding, just the flames make it so dangerous to do this because it's more likely to blow out the figure. But on a wood like ebony, perfectly fine. If I were to be doing this on a guitar with flame maple binding, I would do it by hand with a scraper, just like we did on the top, but obviously on the sides, and I'd use just a standard square cabinet scraper.